It was a cold winter morning when the city still seemed half asleep, wrapped in fog and silence. Inside the towering glass building of a multinational empire, the early cleaning crew moved quietly from floor to floor, making sure everything was pristine before the first wave of employees arrived. Among them was a man most people barely noticed, Daniel, the janitor. He was in his late 50s, with weathered hands and kind eyes that had seen their share of hardship. Life had taught him patience and humility, and though he was invisible to many, he carried within him an unshakable belief that every soul had a purpose. On the 34th floor, the CEO's private suite stood untouched since the night before. The CEO, Alexander Hayes, was a man of great wealth and influence, a self-made millionaire whose empire stretched across continents. He was known for his relentless drive, intimidating presence, and the ability to turn failing businesses into gold mines. Yet, despite his success, a cloud of personal sorrow had loomed over him for years. His young daughter, Emily, had lost her ability to speak after a traumatic accident. No amount of medical expertise, no cutting-edge therapy, and no amount of money could bring her voice back. That morning, Alexander arrived earlier than usual. His face was drawn, his eyes red from lack of sleep. Daniel was just finishing polishing the marble floors when Alexander stepped in. Their eyes met briefly, and Daniel nodded politely, preparing to leave. But Alexander's voice, gravelly and tinged with desperation, stopped him. "If you teach her to speak again, I'll give you everything," Alexander said suddenly, his voice trembling. Daniel froze. At first, he thought he had misheard. "Sir?" he asked gently. "My daughter, Emily. She hasn't spoken a single word in 2 years," Alexander said, running a hand through his hair. "The doctors say it's psychological trauma. They've tried everything, speech therapists, specialists, you name it. Nothing works. But yesterday, I overheard her humming while you were cleaning near the playroom. You did something. Tell me what it was, and if you can make her speak again, I'll give you everything you want." Daniel was silent for a long moment. He remembered that day vividly. Emily had been sitting alone on the floor with her dolls, her big blue eyes fixed on nothing in particular. Daniel had passed by and, without thinking, began softly whistling an old lullaby his grandmother used to sing. To his surprise, Emily had turned her head, the faintest smile on her lips. She had hummed along, just for a few seconds, before retreating into her quiet world. "Sir, I can't promise you I can make her speak," Daniel said gently. "But I can promise to try." Alexander, a man used to commanding armies of employees, felt strangely powerless. He simply nodded, his eyes filled with the kind of hope that made a person vulnerable. From that day on, Daniel's routine changed. Every evening, after his shift, he would visit Emily in the small therapy room on the top floor of the Hayes mansion. He never pressured her. Instead, he told her stories of his childhood, of stray cats he had rescued, of gardens he had planted in places no one expected. Sometimes he would play soft tunes on a small harmonica he carried in his pocket. Other times, he would draw silly pictures just to make her laugh. Days turned into weeks. Emily began to smile more often. She'd point at things in his stories and giggle, or she'd mimic the sounds of the harmonica. Alexander watched from the doorway more than once, his heart aching with a strange mix of gratitude and fear. He didn't dare interrupt, afraid the fragile progress would vanish. One rainy afternoon, Daniel was telling her about the time he built a birdhouse with his father. He described the sound of the hammer, the smell of the fresh wood, the excitement of waiting for a bird to move in. Emily was coloring quietly, her little hands steady and focused. Suddenly, she looked up at him and whispered, barely audible, "Bluebird." Daniel froze, his eyes wide. "What did you say?" Her lips trembled, but she said it again, clearer this time, "Bluebird." It was the first word she had spoken in 2 years. Daniel's throat tightened, and he forced himself to keep his voice calm, even though his heart felt like it was going to burst. "Yes," he said softly, smiling, "a bluebird." When Alexander heard the news, he rushed to the room. Emily ran to him, and though she didn't say anything else that day, the sound of that single word had broken the silence that had imprisoned her. Over the next few weeks, Emily began to say more, small words at first, then short sentences. Daniel never once pushed her. He simply created a space where she felt safe to let her voice return. Slowly, laughter and conversation began to fill the Hayes household again. True to his word, Alexander called Daniel into his office one evening. "You've done the impossible," Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion. "Name your price." Anything. It's yours. Daniel thought for a long moment. Sir, he finally said, I don't want money, cars, or houses. All I want is for Emily to never forget that her voice matters. Promise me you'll always listen to her, not just hear her words, but truly listen. Alexander was stunned. He had expected demands for riches, but instead, the janitor was asking for something priceless yet intangible. He extended his hand, his grip firm. I promise, he said. From that day forward, Emily grew stronger, her voice steady and confident. Alexander learned to slow down, to spend time with her, not as the CEO of a global empire, but as a father who cherished every word his daughter spoke. Daniel continued working in the building, still unnoticed by most, but he didn't mind. He had seen firsthand how a single act of kindness could change a life forever. Sometimes, on his lunch break, he would pass by the park and see Emily playing with her friends, calling out with laughter. Every time, it filled him with a quiet, enduring joy. And though Alexander never stopped offering him anything he wanted, Daniel never accepted more than a simple, thank you, and a place in their lives. Because for him, the greatest reward wasn't wealth, it was hearing Emily's voice ring out in the world again, bright and full of life, like the song of a bluebird on a spring morning. Some say miracles are rare. Daniel would disagree. Sometimes, miracles aren't grand displays of magic or divine intervention, they're the gentle persistence of a kind soul who refuses to give up. And sometimes, all it takes to change a life is not the promise of everything, but the willingness to simply be there, quietly, until the silence breaks. Even years later, long after Alexander had retired from his empire and Emily had grown into a confident young woman, they still invited Daniel to family dinners. On Emily's wedding day, she sought him out, hugged him tightly, and whispered in his ear, "Bluebird." Daniel smiled, his eyes glistening, knowing that a simple word had once unlocked a world of hope, and that the bond they had formed would never fade. Because in the end, the story was never about the CEO's wealth or the janitor's humble position. It was about the power of patience, love, and the quiet belief that no soul is beyond reach. And that, perhaps, is the richest gift of all.